This podcast is brought to you by Helicopter. Tired of listings that go nowhere? Exhausted by tire kickers who waste your time? Don't sell your helicopter alone. Helicopter handles the entire process from start to finish. So, if your helicopter is sat too long waiting for a buyer, contact the team at Helicopter today for your complimentary market valuation. Call 1-855-HELICOPTER, 1-855-735-5226, or email sales@helicopter.com. Helicopter. List it, sell it, done.
Hello and welcome to the Helicopter Podcast. My name is Halsey, and today is a party. We decided it would be more fun to have a little bit of a group joining the podcast today of self-proclaimed industry experts. I think we can call ourselves that. I'm not sure how many years combined we have, but joining me today we have Brian Court. Say hello, Brian.
Hey.
We have Mr. Zach Whitehead. Zach, how's it going, buddy?
Good. How are y'all?
Doing good. We have Zach Robinson, who has the perfect last name for the Helicopter Podcast. Zach, say hello.
Hey, what's going on, guys?
And we have the outlier in the group, our favorite mechanic, AMP-IA, Mike Underwood. Mike, what's happening, buddy?
Howdy, y'all.
All right. Well, guys, welcome to the Helicopter Podcast. I'm super excited to have everyone here today. We thought it would be kind of fun to change things up a little bit and every month or maybe every couple months get a group of us together and just talk about helicopters, talk shop, and just have a good time. So let's start with Brian Court. Brian, just give us a quick introduction of yourself, okay?
Okay. Yeah. I'm Brian, and I fly EMS helicopters here in the state of Texas. Live in Austin. Have just outside of Austin in Dripping Springs, and got a brand new baby.
Brand new baby lady. Awesome. And Zach Whitehead, we're going to have to go like a little kid style, like we're in second grade again. So Zach, you will be Zach W. And Zach Robinson will be Zach R. So Zach W., who are you and what do you do in the helicopter world?
Yeah, sure. So been flying. I started flying when I was 17 and just kind of did a very typical route up through flight instruction. Then I was a CFI, then tours at a couple different companies, Canyon, and then EMS. Worked EMS for a few years, and very, very, very recently switched from being a EMS pilot with Air Evac Life Team to flying the local news helicopter here in San Antonio, where my wife and I and our little ones, I got a 3-year-old son and a 1-year-old daughter, and we've been here for about a year now.
Awesome. Well, Zach, we are excited to have you on the show, and I'm actually excited to make sure that we talk about your transition from the EMS world to the news world. So please remind me to talk about that before we go. All right, sure. Mr. Zach R., who are you?
Hey, my name's Zach. I live in Atlanta, Georgia. My story's similar to the other Zach. I did flight training where all these guys did at Hillsborough Aviation, which became Hillsborough Air Academy. Then became a flight instructor myself in Phoenix, Arizona. Did Grand Canyon tours at Papillon for a short time after that. And now I'm back in Georgia, my hometown of Snellville, flying HEMS for Air Evac Life Team. It's come full circle and happy to be here.
That's awesome, man. I that's like the dream, right? Working EMS in the town that you grew up in. I mean, that's uncommon. And it sounds like actually in our previous conversations that the town you live in is quite desirable. It's not like a podunk middle of nowhere town, correct?
It's not what you would commonly find an EMS base in, I've found, because, you know, EMS is more commonly for rural areas to get to more metropolitan areas. Snellville's a pretty big town, only about 10-15 minutes flight by helicopter to the city of Atlanta. And, you know, my base is 2 miles away from where I grew up, so it's kind of awesome. Kind of a dream come true, ending up here.
Yeah, I don't know if that, like, if I'm happy for you or if it makes me not like you, but we'll have to just kind of figure that out. Mike Underwood, you are the outlier. You are not a pilot, but you are an AMP-IA. Give us a little bit of your background.
Yeah, sure. So AMP for 15 years, IA for about 12. Worked at a few different places, helicopters and turboprops, mostly helicopters. And about 7 years ago, started a small kind of a side gig doing some maintenance here in Seguin, and turned it into a pretty thriving maintenance business. I've been doing it ever since.
That's awesome. Yeah. Now, for our guests out there that are maybe new to flying, new to aviation, Mike, can you explain just a little bit the difference between A&P and the IA, the designations that we had mentioned?
Yeah, sure. So A&P is a combination of airframe and power plant certifications. It's kind of the first license you get as a mechanic. And then the inspection authorization, or IA, is an additional certification that allows you to exercise more privileges, mainly to do annual inspections, major repairs and alterations, and progressive inspections if you so desire.
Okay, so essentially, when you look at, say, I think in Part 43, and then maybe again in 91-409, when talking about 100-hour versus annual and whatnot, would you agree that really the annual is very similar to the 100-hour? However, as an IA, you're kind of giving that final stamp of approval, and that's why you're authorized to sign it off as an annual?
Yeah, in most cases, the inspections are really similar. There could be, some small differences, but essentially, yeah, the FAA mandates that the IA sign off the annual inspections because often cases they're private owners and airplanes that don't get looked at by anyone that's part of an organization, and are often neglected, and they trust that an individual with an IA is going to take the time and exercise their privileges to make sure that the airplane is safe for that owner.
Awesome. Well, we're excited to learn a little bit more about the maintenance side today. Hopefully we can drum up some maintenance questions as well. But I really think it's common in the actual helicopter industry itself is to be dual rated, to be a helicopter pilot and a mechanic. I bet we have a lot of listeners that are kind of either doing that or wanting to take that path. It certainly serves itself very useful working in the field, utility, fire, and things like that. So we're excited, Mike, even though, you're a mechanic, whatever, we're very excited to have you on. I think that there's this old rift in the industry, right? Can we all agree that there's always been like, hey, we're the meat servo and we break it and you fix it and we're right and we're actually wrong and you're wrong, and it's just always been a mess. However, you've worked on helicopters that I've flown, and I feel like hopefully collectively, not just with me, but the industry is changing with pilots and mechanics getting along a little bit better. So it's nice that we have you here and we're all kumbaya. So I do want to start off today and talk a little bit about paying for flight training. I'm sure that a lot of our listeners out there are potentially getting into flight training, considering flight training. And essentially myself, Zach R., Zach W., and Brian on the flight school route, we all potentially had some different ways of funding school. So Brian, why don't you kick us off here? How did you support yourself, or I guess I should say, how did you support your flight school flight hours and your overall financing of getting trained?
Yeah, so I'm a military veteran, spent 8 years in the U.S. Air Force and utilized my GI Bill, my post 9/11 GI Bill. Ultimately, kind of a roundabout story, I met Halsey, and he was the one that introduced me to ultimately getting in with Hillsborough Aviation. At the time, I believe, Halsey, you were assistant chief or somewhere high in the ranks of doing that with Hillsborough.
Some type of big deal.
You were a big deal in my eyes, not so much now, but yeah, definitely then. And I just went 0 to hero utilizing my post 9/11. Very, very fortunate. It was prior to all of the mess that occurred later, I think in 2014 timeframe, where the VA withdrew all of those benefits from veterans, and I have a lot of people that ultimately kind of got left out on their butt in that regard. But I made it through very luckily prior to all of that, and have been operating ever since.
Well, that's awesome. Well, first and foremost, we do appreciate your service, and I will briefly tell the story because this is kind of funny how life works out. Brian's whole life now hinged on a moment in a men's locker room at a gym that him and I went to. his course of life changed. He was on a trajectory of med school, actually. And essentially, I derailed it. I showed up to his gym. You can't really tell here. Maybe you can tell in the podcast. Brian's a pretty strong guy, and him and I were in the same CrossFit class back in the day. And I came in after work one day. I had my flight suit on, and Brian was like, "What is that?" And essentially, he figured out in the locker room there with the flight suit, like, "Oh my God, I can use my GI benefits and do that." And I mean, Brian, correct me if I'm wrong, but within like 2 or 3 weeks of that, you were enrolled, correct?
Yeah, it was literally. I went from learning how to put jelly on people's knees and and then went and did my first introductory flight. And I think that was within a 2-week period. Ultimately, it was a quick turnaround since I was already utilizing my GI bills to go to med school that they did a relatively quick transfer. So I got lucky.
So you either love me or hate me, but here you are today on the Helicopter Podcast with that one chance introduction. So again, military, utilized the GI benefits. I talked to Trent Vick, a mutual friend of ours, last week, obviously on the podcast, and he said that it seems like some schools are still able to utilize the post 9/11, getting funding, being accredited by different colleges and working kind of in conjunction, like Hillsborough is with PCC and whatnot. So I'm really excited. I hope that program exists. Something that Trent mentioned that I really liked too, to our veterans out there, make sure that you are also holding yourself accountable. I know someone like Brian Court, you treated school like your job. When you're going through there. And I think that is your obligation as the veteran going to school, not to just look at it as a free ride, but a way for you to go and actually, work your butt off and get through that. So, and I know that's exactly what you did. I'm excited to catch up a little bit more with you, Brian, on what you did after that. But Zach W., what was your background getting through training?
Yeah. So, like I said earlier, I started way back when I was 17. So obviously no military.
It looks like you're 12
like
still.
Yeah.
So,
so this was half a year ago, right? Yeah.
Okay.
No, I'm feeling old these days. I just turned 30. But I know, right? I look at 2 with my patchy beard here. Just went from having to be able to fit an N95 mask being an EMS pilot to not having to do that anymore. I'm trying to make the transition here.
You're letting it go.
Yeah. So anyway, the way I did it, like these guys have said, I also went to Hillsborough Aviation at Hillsborough Aero Academy up there in Oregon. And in an attempt to figure out a way to be able to get my hands on, the $60,000, $70,000, $80,000 that it takes to get through all that, I ended up doing the program they mentioned here with Portland Community College. So I got an aviation or an associate's degree in aviation science through them. And basically it was fun. It was a cool program, but it also basically just gave me access to federal financial aid. So I was able to do the whole FAFSA thing and get federally backed student loans. And that worked out quite well as far as being able to actually get the funds for it. For the most part, I ran into a small amount of trouble with the last, say, $8,000 or so I needed, which is one of those funny things where, you can get your hands on 80, no problem at the right time. But once the doors close, getting that last little bit is, coming up with that out of nowhere. But that worked out really well to get me through it all. I will say, it's one of those things where, especially going into, first job as a flight instructor, just for any young guys considering getting into this and doing that route, because I know that route should still be quite available. For me at that time, at least, this would have been 2008, 2009 when I was getting most of these loans. The rates I got locked in with on those were 7.5% to 8.5% on between the $20,000 or so for the associate's degree on top of the cost for the flight training, the better part of around $100,000, right? So the at 8% interest, the minimum payments just on keeping on top of those was significant for a while, and so that was pretty tricky to stay on top of, especially right there in the beginning in that low-paying CFI job and stuff like that. But so I'm still carrying some of that around with me. Refinanced it all through a credit union at some point when I was able to. But that's sort of how that all worked out for me.
No, I appreciate it, Zach. And I'm going to kind of interject myself a little bit and talk about my experience because it's slightly different. I also took out a loan. And I really like what you said there, Zach, about kind of understanding what your interest rate is and kind of what that all means. I don't know about you guys, but for me personally, in my high school and in getting raised, there just wasn't a big emphasis on understanding how money works, how lending works, specifically in my case, how a private student loan would work. I was 18, young and dumb, certainly with a capital D there for sure. And, I just figured like, I got $80,000 from, some lady named Sally Mae, and just have at it, right? And what I didn't fully understand at that time is I had a variable interest rate, and I've been lucky. The interest rate hasn't been astronomical, but it is variable, so it does change. But yeah, I was not prepared in the slightest to actually start repaying my loan. And effectively, the way that my private student loan worked, again, not federal like Zach, I didn't do the college program kind of concurrently. So I would recommend if you're going to a helicopter flight school and you have an option to go into a accredited associate's degree program or whatever it is to help get the federal funding, I would do that. There's more flexibility. I think you can even do like payments based on interest-based rate, which would essentially lower your payments as you're getting paid lower, and then it adjusts as you start making more. It just helps you kind of manage it. Now with private loans, you can't do that. You have to pay X amount. It's, I think full disclosure, I've been paying and I continue to pay somewhere, $700 plus a month to pay off that debt. And that started essentially from day one after graduating the program. So please work with your parents, work with someone that is maybe responsible and understands lending. I know a lot of young people, young men and women are getting into flying just kind of willy-nilly. Understand what happens when you have to pay it back. So the big difference between Zach and I, minus my good looks, is his loan, a little more flexibility, higher interest rate. Whereas my private loan, lower interest rate, but not so much flexibility with the payment options. So that is definitely, we're still borrowing money, but two different factions. If the current administration would have forgiven student loan debt, like they were talking about, then Zach, your debt could have been forgiven since it was federally subsidized, where my private...
Because I was responsible and refinanced. So, most of it, I did the responsible thing and walked myself out of that option. But
okay. Yeah. So just kind of food for thought, but we both essentially had borrowed some money. We're still paying it off, or at least I am. So what about you, Mr. Zach? I actually don't know how you paid for school. How'd you get through?
Yeah, not anything completely interesting or unique. I consider myself very blessed and fortunate that my folks were able to help me through. I was 21, and they, flying kind of runs in my family. Both my grandfathers were pilots, both were in the Air Force, and I'd mentioned some interest in this to them, and they were all for it, and they helped me through. Having that backing from them, and them funding my training. 2021, I was not mature at all. I was the same as I was when I was 17, 18, probably just, I thought this was something I wanted to do. I did not know 100%. I don't think anybody at that age truly does. And, but knowing that my mom and dad were backing me, it was like I owed it to them to get through and at least see it through and get all my licenses and certs. And at that point, the world was wide open. So, yeah, my mom and dad, I thank them for it.
So let me get this straight. Your base is 2 miles away from where you grew up, and your parents paid for your training?
Absolutely, yeah.
All right. I need you to leave the podcast.
Yeah, can you take him off, please?
Yeah.
I'm just kidding. That's awesome, right? I think it's if your parents can help you with that, I almost feel like it's an obligation of a parent. A lot of parents help. Like my wife, for instance, her parents paid for her college, that her degree that she uses. She doesn't. And, essentially, if your parents can support that, then that's really cool. So kudos to your parents, and good on you for taking it seriously, right? That's a lot of money. It's a big commitment. And by honoring your parents and making sure that you went out there and went and did it, was awesome. I think that's maybe one difference in helicopter flight school. It's like, I saw a lot of my friends go to, typical university their parents were paying or whatnot. There's a lot of distractions at those big universities. And going to say, business 101 or, economics 101, whatever it is, certainly not as fun as like getting in an R-22 and training. So it definitely kind of helps to have that flying portion. But if you're just getting into flying, I would have to say that it's actually quite rigorous, right? Zach R., what were some of the struggles that you had as a student that maybe you weren't even expecting, or what did you think about helicopter flight school versus the reality of how it really was?
I mean, just the initial research stages of it, I was infatuated. Kind of researching the career path and the steps and the milestones, and it all looked great, but I had not really dug into it. Getting into a helicopter for the first time, getting into a Robinson, there are many days initially where I'm like, is this for me? Am I going to be able to do this? Looking at everything and trying to take it all in. It was really a grind for all of it, for me anyway. I know I could see other guys, it came a lot easier for. A lot of others alongside me could not even do it at all. I'd say I was right in the middle to upper middle of the guys going through training around the same time I was. I would just say do your research. If it interests you, read up on it. There's nothing in, the initial stages of flight training that you can't take into your own hands. I think a flight instructor is a guide, and they are going to teach you a lot of things, but everything they're going to tell you is in a book. And getting back to that financial thing, to minimize your expenses, read ahead, study up before you go into your ground lessons. And as well as, prepare for your flights. Aerodynamic hazards, regulations, you can take it into your own hands and expedite your training, as well as minimize your finances. So once I learned that, it definitely started going smoother for me.
Not only that,
awesome.
just to add to that too, is it's an interview from the beginning. And if you treat it like that as such, you're not only going to be more successful, but it's going to get you into the career field better.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, I'm surprised I got hired, actually. I think I talked about this with Trent last week. I mean, I was a total dirtbag, so to speak, during my training. I mean, talk about being young and immature. I mean, that was me, and I was just lucky that I had the right people still believe in me and give me that kind of opportunity, and blame some of my behavior on youth. But it's a great point by Brian and a great point by Zach. It's helicopter flight training is a lot of it, you can take the controls literally of your own training, open the book specifically on the ground portion. I mean, that's what holds everyone up, right? It's not like, you can teach a monkey, I suppose, to do an auto rotation, but, teaching them to fully grasp aerodynamics and aerodynamic hazards and, all the different little things or all the topics that you have to be somewhat knowledgeable of. So it's a good point, and I appreciate you saying that, Zach. Now, Mike, obviously on the maintenance side, schooling looks a little bit different, and there's a couple of different ways of getting certified. How did you get your certifications, your A&P, IA? And what are some of the other ways our listeners could maybe pursue a career in A&P or IA?
Yeah, so I guess I went the traditional route, through a trade school, basically. It was a 2-year program. I got out, you have to qualify for your exam, and then you go take your exam with a DME, mechanic examiner, and they issue your certificates. The other way, which is much less common and more difficult to do, is to get on-the-job training. So like, for example, we have a guy that works here as an apprentice. He's a very qualified mechanic, worked for a Ford dealership for many years, came in here and has been working here for 2 years now. And once he hits, I believe it's 30 months, which is 2.5 years, he will have met the requirements for the FAA to take his exam, without ever having gone to school. And in a way, the training he's gotten here, I feel like is much more valuable than one would get in a classroom setting or a lab setting, so to speak. So that's kind of the two options when it comes to A&P. And when it comes to the IA, the only real requirements are that you have used your A&P actively for 3 years consecutively, and that you have applied with the FAA to receive that, and they've signed off on it. and then after that it's a written test.
Now, Mike, I know that you've been doing this for a while. You've been out of school for a while. Do you have any beat on kind of some of the current costs that someone could expect if they go like the traditional route, or at least kind of a ballpark?
I haven't looked into it in a very long time. I think when I went to school, I got some student loans, and then it was very inexpensive. I think it was less than like maybe $15K for the program, everything included. I know that there are other schools that are nonprofits that charge a lot more than that. I think in the neighborhood of like double that, like $30K. So
interesting. Well, that's cool. It's always good to kind of see that it's really achievable or obtainable, I should say, to I think I even had friends in flight school that did the A&P course that kind of concurrently as they did flight training. So if you are out there, you're interested in mechanics, interested in working on helicopters, but you also want to fly, that's very desirable to have on your resume as a helicopter pilot. So I would certainly recommend it. So, well, I appreciate it. We all have a little bit of a bit different background. Us pilots, we all did go to Hillsborough Aviation, now Hillsborough Aero Academy. I feel like when I was there, I got really good training. I don't think there's maybe in Utah, but like it's so beautiful in Oregon. I miss those days, getting in an R-22 and going out to the West practice area and having like it looked like a playground of, pinnacle landings between Hillsborough and the Oregon coast, flying out to Tillamook. So a lot of good times shared out there. And I'm glad that I've been able to stay in touch with you, which is kind of going to segue into my next topic is networking. We're all still here talking. We've all been, going through this whole helicopter thing for a long time. Brian, how about you talk a little bit about networking and what you've done to stay in touch with people and how you've used your networking to benefit you in a positive way?
Yeah, I think I owe the majority of where I'm at in the industry from networking. I think that from the very beginning, starting at Hillsborough and going to PCC and stuff like that, I literally call it my little black book. I have a legitimate little black book that I write everybody's phone number, information, what they do, down, and I just stay in contact with everybody. It's very simplistic. I like talking to people, and so it is something that comes very easy to me, and just connecting and whatnot. But what that allows for is just many doors to open. I think I've been told on numerous occasions that people are surprised that I'm in the position of where I'm at, flying a Bell 429 and flying EMS this early in the stage of my career. And it's just I owe it to a lot of just kind of, in a way, keeping tabs on a lot of people, and not necessarily like in a vindictive way or anything along those lines, but just, putting myself out there and getting to be on the forefront of people's minds, because that's where opportunities lie.
Yeah, I mean, it's great to it's fun to talk shop. So that's like the easy way of staying in touch. All love talking about helicopters. That's what we all have in common. But, I always looked at my network of friends and other industry professionals as not just like a means to an end, but I really treated those friendships as they were important to me, that I, enjoyed these people. I enjoyed being their friend. And hey, if they happen to work at a company that I want to work at, then it was awesome to have that relationship, because essentially they could help walk my resume to the chief pilot, or bring my resume to the right person, or even just give me guidance. Sean Moretz, who couldn't join us today, he was always a really big, cheerleader for me. He's a guy that would, hey, I got a friend here. I can pass your resume here. And, just really helping people out. And he always said, hey, listen, you're going to have the opportunity to do it someday. And I feel like I have. I feel like Brian is an example.
For me, yep.
You and I have done a ton of talking. I've connected some dots for you. You've helped me with things, more recently. So it's really cool to be helping each other. Now, Zach, what kind of networking have you guys, I guess, used in your career to help kind of keep in touch with people, but also to help progress you from, say, CFI to flying in the canyon to kind of where you're at now? We'll go with Zach W.
Sure. Zach R and me are probably both sitting here saying, okay, which one's going to go first here?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I definitely, I agree with you guys on all points. I do think, just to continue to sort of throw things in there for anybody who might be, coming out of high school and getting curious about getting into this, like, at the age I did. One thing that looking back, I wish I had done a better job of this during flight school. Especially at that point, this was really kind of in the height of people being able to use the VA bill and stuff like that. So a lot of, I was 18, 19 years old through most of my training, and most of the other guys were mid-late 20s or older, and they were coming out of a military career. And so there's a difference in responsibility and maturity and stuff like that. And so I didn't necessarily, I could have done a lot better job of casting a lot wider net during flight school if I had recognized how massively valuable that was going to be. I think, like what Ryan was saying, it's a really good idea to start early with that stuff. But especially because I can say every single job that I've gotten has been with the help of someone that I've known. I can getting hired on as a flight instructor. Well, for one, Halsey was the assistant chief then. He hired me. But
not a big deal.
Yeah. Although not through friendship. We weren't friends yet. But, yeah, it was a big deal. There you go. But I got some free.
I just want to throw this out there to the universe too. I threw myself under the bus with Emily Spates as well. But Zach Whitehead, can you just tell people what the problem with Halsey was back in the day? You have the perfect example. Just say it.
Totally, yeah, because he ended up being my boss for a while in the beginning there, and especially as like a somewhat naive, like I was 20, 21 or something when I got hired on as a CFI, and Halsey managed like a football coach. And that's just kind of was his style. He was a little rough around the edges still. I think, a lot of responsibility on a young dude, I guess, right? But it was a little rough and abrupt sometimes in his managing style.
Yeah, no, I totally, that was, it's still something that I'm, trying to come to peace with. I think that when we talk about networking, it's important to also, I think about that at least, like, I've been lucky to be able to stay in contact, but, call a spade, right? I wasn't a very nice person all the time. It wasn't like awful all the time, but it wasn't great. And I had some reasons, like my CFI, people didn't like my CFI stage checks, but I always did them extra hard because I wanted to really prepare people and get them ready, because I really felt like, man, this is a giant responsibility and people didn't get me ready for it. So I just kind of wanted to impose that, but I was certainly a little bit rough. So I'm glad that you guys, at least my small group here, has forgiven me. I think others have forgiven me as well. I think that you guys still work with me a little bit in that capacity. So I hope that I'm doing better, and being happy, right? Say yes. So anyway, I'm sorry, Zach. I just had to cut you off because that was funny. Yeah. So, I like that idea. Like, you're young, you're naive. You didn't think kind of that long-term play of casting that net. And you actually said that all of your jobs to this point have kind of been through your network. Yeah.
So in fact, while you're talking, I was thinking about it here, and I guess just advantage of going to a large flight school, but every single job I've had. So I worked at Hillsborough Aviation as a flight instructor. From there, I worked at Papillon at the South Rim flying long rangers for them. There, I was able to have Rusty Knudsen, who I knew from Hillsborough. He was their assistant lead pilot at the time. Yep, and he walked my resume in, to the chief pilot there. From there, I went over to Maverick Helicopters in Las Vegas. Same thing. I think I had Kyle Pratt walk it in there. When I went over from there eventually to
KP?
PHI, I went to PHI Aeromedical. I used Dan Bentley to push my resume through from that direction. And when I switched over to Air Evac, I actually used Halsey. And similarly with getting into the news, Halsey was a connection there as well. So, I mean, I think it's, just being, most of these, you walk into a chief pilot's office and if they're printing these things, the stack of resumes is like this, right? And there's like these 7 that actually matter because they were already recommended by somebody that worked for them, is kind of the way I've always viewed it. So I think
it's all about who you know.
Yeah.
And, it's kind of funny because Zach Robinson, I guess I was a little bit OG, original gangster there at Hillsboro long before you, right? I mean, I was already working as a flight instructor or even in management when you started. Is that correct?
Yeah. I mean, we never talked much until, we got in contact about Helicopter, but you actually did my interview for dispatch at Hillsboro. It was 2012, I think, or 2013. So you helped me with that. You're my reference for air evac, and then now Helicopter. So,
well, and that was cool because I remember, I appreciated that. I remember it like yesterday. I got this random call from this Georgia number at air evac, and it's like, hey, it's Zach Robinson, and I remembered you, and I remembered doing the dispatch interview and things like that, and it was awesome just to catch up. But you and I didn't necessarily stay in contact all the time, but we definitely were in the good graces of each other. And, I thought it was admirable of you to reach out and say, hey, man, I'm curious about working at Air Evac. What can you tell me about it? And I felt like that was awesome. I don't know if Air Evac still offers it, but at that time, too, they offered a referral bonus, for helping bring on new employees. So I think I got a little kickback from Zach and Zach, the double Zach discount. So that was awesome. But it was cool. That's a, case in point. I'm sure Zach Robinson would have got the Air Evac job regardless and whatnot. But the fact that I did, pick up the phone after and call Janie Foster, the head of recruiting there, and say, hey, listen, this guy, Zach, super nice guy. He would be someone that Air Evac would be lucky to have on. That goes a long way for getting a job compared to not having that. So I love the idea of just having a vast network and really casting that wide net. So what about you, Mike? Any experience in the maintenance world where, networking has kind of been to your benefit or helped you progress into your goals?
Yeah, it's been the key, actually. You really can't get very far in maintenance without some kind of good reputation and some level of trust from the people that you do work for. And so you pretty much rely on them to, spread the good word about, where to take your Robinson helicopter to get worked on. And so taking care of those folks and, leaning on them a little bit when it came down to, widening the customer base or whether it be other people in the industry too that I've been able to kind of partner with, and when it comes to acquiring parts and things, like even our network of competition has been like invaluable. Like I'll call up, Sevier County if we need something that's kind of hard to find and they've got it, they'll overnight it to us and we reciprocate, and it's been great.
Yeah, it's awesome. I mean, I've as you guys know, of course, with Helicopter, we've worked with other brokerages. And it's always been so friendly. I feel like we're, for the most part, a friendly industry where everyone's playing nicely because undoubtedly you're going to need help someday. And so it's always kind of like this revolving door of everyone just being okay with helping for the most part. Sevier County, of course, being one. TJ Helicopters, who's also connected with Sevier, but Jimmy's always been a guy that you can pick up the phone and talk to. So it's really cool to be able to have, perceived competitors be the guys that are also helping. But I think that also has to go with you as a person, right? Because they know that you would reciprocate. And so I think it's important to always be putting your best foot forward. So I appreciate you saying that, Mike. And I have to ask, you have a lot of helicopters behind you. And I know what those helicopters are. Can you tell our audience all those, the picture up top there, what is that of?
Yeah, so few will know, and I probably should have used it as part of my introduction too, since it's so large and behind me right here. But that was Silver State Helicopters in 2005, I believe, for the safety stand down in Las Vegas.
Interesting. So for our listeners that might be new to the helicopter world, Mike, can you just give us a quick rundown on Silver State, what they were, what they did, and what ultimately happened? You don't need to, it's not about what you think or what happened, just kind of the the perceived, hey, this is how it all went down?
I think in 100 words or less, they were a very successful helicopter flight school. They used their success in a way to leverage opening more flight schools, and in most people's opinions took advantage of the student loan market at that point in time. And so what would happen is they would open a flight school, sign up 100 students. Most of those students would receive their tuition, and that tuition was paid in full to Silver State Helicopters before they even walked in the door. And they would take that money up with five more flight schools. Essentially, it was, in most people's opinions, like a kind of a Ponzi scheme, and eventually it collapsed.
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, if you are new to the industry, before I even started flying helicopters, I remember being at my 1 year, as I'm holding two fingers up here, my 1 year of, that's like Zach Whitehead the other day. I'm like asking his kid, like, how old are you? And he's like, I'm 2. His kid is very smart though. But I remember being in Daytona Beach on my 1 year of Embry-Riddle and hearing like these ads on the radio constantly, like, are you interested in an exhilarating career of being a helicopter pilot? Come to our expo. And I mean, they were pushing it hard and they became giant. I mean, do you know, Mike, kind of ballpark the fleet size?
The fleet size, I believe, surpassed about 300 helicopters at one point. And I think they had as many as 40 flight school locations.
Oh, it's crazy. Yeah, I mean, that was a big deal. So I started flight training. It collapsed, in 2008 or 9, Mike?
7? 8?
Super Bowl Sunday. So I, living in Oregon, we went, and my parents and I, we went to Hillsborough Aviation at the time, looked at Hillsborough, and I was like, it's pretty cool, but hey, we should have another secondary option. And Silver State had opened up a campus in Salem, Oregon. And so I went there, checked it out, and thank God that the guy that was managing that location was like the worst salesman. And like we left like, okay, well, I guess I'm going to Hillsborough. Like there was just no option. And I think like 2 or 3 weeks later, they closed down. So I feel like I dodged a bullet because I know a lot of people were really affected by that. And I think that there's actually still a lot of ripples and a lot of upset people. So if there's anyone listening that has more privy information to the Silver State or experience that, let me know. I'd love to hear kind of more of it from a perspective of someone that actually lost their money and how you've kind of overcome that. That's a bit of a tangent. So interesting. I had to talk about it. That being said, even the highest up management at Silver State didn't really know what was going on or didn't even know the school was collapsing or closing, as I'm to understand. So the fact that Mike worked there, it's not a red tick on your resume at all, but it certainly was, a very big thing and a big deal for the helicopter industry. And a lot of those Sierra Hotel helicopters are still operating today. I remember Hillsborough got
still
a ton
out
of
there.
Them, so.
It was a fun place to work, though.
Awesome. Well, yeah, I'm sure. I mean, a bunch of helicopter people having a good time. You were in New Braunfels at the time. That's kind of where they started, right?
Well, they were headquartered in Vegas, so they had just moved headquarters here. And I happened to live here and work at this base. Yeah, when it all went down, sure.
All right. I think my connection's a little weird, so I might be stepping on Mike. And if I'm doing that, I apologize. But since I'm having a hard time hearing him, I'm just going to continue on. So recently, guys, I want to get into some industry news. Obviously, a big hot topic right now is the report coming out of the Kobe Bryant accident. Obviously, just a tremendous loss for the sports world, but also a big hit for the helicopter world. Now, Zach Whitehead, if you don't know, Kobe Bryant played basketball, so I don't know if you know that or not. I think everyone else does. But hey, so I remember when I heard about the accident, and right away I kind of had like this C-fit, like within like 20 minutes of kind of just knowing some of the details. I was on a cruise actually, and my friends were like, what happened? I was like, well, it sounds like they, ran a helicopter into the ground, essentially with spatial disorientation and getting in a cloud. Brian, what have you taken away from this accident report, and kind of your thoughts on what went down in the whole Kobe deal?
Yeah, it's obviously a sensitive subject. I just listened to the two gentlemen from HAI, Jim Viola, who's the chairman of HAI, and then Bruce over at NTSB. They had an AbWeb podcast, and they kind of discussed the ins and outs of the NTSB report being finalized and everything. And one of the things that I agree with is that this isn't a new topic. This is something that we're dealing with somebody who's popular, celebrity, which is the main reason for the majority of this discussion, not in the aviation world, outside of the aviation world, and why somebody with 8,000 plus hours, I think is what that gentleman had, would funnel into the Swiss cheese model and get through it. This is what we've always been trained as. And I don't know about you guys, but I remember my instructor there at Hillsborough was like, check that you wake up in the morning, check the weather, see what your phone says, get out, look outside, just get a sense of what's going on, get a sense on the drive to the airport, get a sense prior to stepping in the aircraft. All of these things just kind of build and formulate an idea of should I go or not go. And then even if that doesn't happen, it's tough to not make the decision of land and live, which is also discussed in that podcast. Obviously money is not an aspect there. So land, get the gentleman a limousine to their location or something. It's just making that decision, which I think a lot of people are hesitant to do. I've done it. I've literally been in the scenario post Hurricane Harvey doing support down there and coming back, and I got stuck and was in a bad situation. And in a little OH-6 coming back from Houston to San Antonio area, we landed in a farmer's field. No kidding. We had banana bread and lemonade. The farmer came out with banana bread and lemonade, and it was one of the best experiences I've ever had by just deciding that either deciding to land or deciding to climb and utilize the aircraft's capabilities, which I think should have been done in this scenario. It's a very capable aircraft that could have gotten them out of trouble, and unfortunately it was not. Maybe didn't know how to utilize the systems on board. So my push in this whole spiel that I have is know your aircraft, know the capabilities of it, and utilize it.
Yeah, I mean, totally. There's a lot of, I think, breakdown and factors there, potentially some disuse as well. Not being super competent with the systems. But I also think that it goes down to some fundamentals of, aviate, navigate, communicate, and I feel like in the research that I've done, that leading up just before the accident actually occurred, he was more concerned potentially about trying to, get his system all set up and not focusing on just keeping the wings level, right, with the basic instrument flying, aviating, navigating, communicating, fly that aircraft, climb, situate it and get it into a position. I have to say, I think I'm okay to say this, but Air Evac, I thought, did a great job in their inadvertent IMC training. I know Zach can attest to that as well. The aircraft are equipped with the Hilary.s and 2-axis autopilot, glass cockpit. It's really nice. However, even with all that equipment, you can really put yourself in a lurch still if you don't just follow some of the basic principles of, hey, let's fly the aircraft first, and then let's kind of situate everything. And then the second point that I have on it is just this mission pressure. Your guy's Kobe Bryant. He has to get there. It's a flight you've done a ton of times. He pays you a lot of money to do it. You just have to kind of do it. Zach, I don't care who goes first. You guys can fight over it. Have you guys had a time in your guys' career where you've had to make a decision that maybe went against what the company wanted, or I should say maybe what the bottom line would suggest?
I'll go first. So I'd say absolutely. I think any pilot that's been flying long enough has. Weather changes so quickly and so drastically, something other than what is forecast. You think about the reasons for your flight. You think about who's on board. You think about getting home. Has it been a long day? You're ready to clock out. Head home. There's so many external factors. Thinking back on a particular scenario where I maybe had to call it and didn't, or did call it and maybe it wasn't quite there. I'd say a Papillon flying over the Grand Canyon. First getting into that job, a bunch of us were new to turbine and felt the need to prove ourselves and fly the most, be out there the longest. And it was nothing against Papillon here, but there was kind of like this idea amongst pilots that if you were the first one to call it because of weather, it might look bad on you. So we would be out there until, there was a thunderstorm, pretty close to our route of flight before we would call it. And there's this idea that no one wanted to be the first. And it took me a while and everyone a while to realize how negative that was. Again, it's nothing against Papillon or how they conducted things. There's nothing against you as a pilot if you call it for weather. But, it was almost kind of a macho factor into your decision making. But yeah, there were quite a few times out there. Once you get the hang of calling it for weather, once you get into commercial operations, it becomes more easy for you. But, like Brian said, always, as soon as you're getting up for the day and you're going to be working that day, start to get an idea for what the weather is, what it's going to be, checking radar. To go off what Halsey said about your evac, they do have a really great system as far as flying in double IMC, Hilary.s, autopilot, and glass cockpit. Practicing those things quarterly, just to know the next step, get out in front of the aircraft, and minimize the startle factor, as the FAA calls it, when you do first flying to the clouds, and knowing exactly what the next step to take is. So that's what we practice.
Yeah, no, it's been awesome. I mean, I obviously don't work there anymore, but I really thought that was valuable training, both in the aircraft. They would just tell you, like, hey, go out, take the aircraft, do some approaches, or do your quarterly sim training or whatnot. So that was awesome. Zach Whitehead, do you have anything to add to the Kobe incident as a whole, or just kind of on this whole premise of, mission pressure, CFIT, whatever it may be?
Yeah, I think these guys hit the big topics of it really, on what Zach was saying, especially, with the tour scenarios, I'd agree. I worked for Papillon as well, but at a different location than he did, I believe. Or actually, were you at South Rim or were you at Boulder?
Yeah, South Rim.
Okay, never mind. We're at the same spot there. But then I was at Maverick in Vegas as well. And, with both of those companies, I think they both have perfectly fine cultures as far as what their policies and stuff are. It's just one of these things, I think, where you get enough pilots and you get a group mentality of general willingness to go, and it becomes really, really difficult to be the one guy who doesn't. I can remember one time at the South Rim where I called it for thunderstorms being too close, and it was hilariously scary to be the guy who finally threw in the towel. And then the very last person before me ended up getting stuck in field, and I felt really, really justified about the whole thing. But, it's like, you look back on it, it's comically difficult to make those decisions. Sometimes you're like, why on earth was anybody considering it, So, I think, that's for any tour pilots out there, just don't be that dude, just call it when you should call it.
Pilots in general.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, Brian, especially in the 429, I think has the right idea on it with, as far as the capabilities of the ship that Kobe was being flown around in. Just from looking at it on that perspective, it's certainly frustrating to see it go that way. The day after it happened, I listened to the ATC recordings of it, and I haven't listened to it since then, but I think I remember hearing the pilots or ATC telling him, hey, the airport you're headed towards IFR, and him saying, it looks like it's going to be okay. So he's there's got that idea of sort of talking yourself into it, but certainly at the very least, something, very recent for me. I just went from these helicopters, flying around with night vision goggles and autopilot and glass cockpit, synthetic vision, all that awesome stuff, in a 407 to now I'm in a very bare bones Jet Ranger because it's got to carry all this camera equipment and, it can't do an ILS. There's not enough equipment in it to even do an instrument approach, you know. So it's as far to the opposite end of the helicopter spectrum as you can get, and that certainly changes. You know, I think we'd all agree there's no good reason to ever go double IMC. You should hopefully have called it and put yourself in a field first. But certainly, I think it's a good idea to understand the equipment you have, and if you're going to use that equipment's capabilities as a safety blanket to be willing to fly in worse weather than you would if it didn't have it, you also got to be willing to actually commit and go through with that and be comfortable using those systems.
Yeah, totally. I mean, you have to know your limits. You have to know your aircraft's limits. And, you know, don't be afraid to set high limits. I mean, I've been flying for a long time, and I'm ultra conservative. I've been doing the backup for the news helicopter, so flying the same helicopter that Zach flies. And yeah, it's bare bones. You know, it's well maintained. It's a nice helicopter. But as far as like getting in the clouds, I don't want to be in that helicopter. And San Antonio is kind of weird weather, specifically early morning when we're flying the traffic, where it can be like clear and then 5 minutes later it's not clear. And so, you know, sometimes I'm telling the news producer like, hey, we can't go. And he's looking outside. He's like, well, it's clear out. It's like, yeah, it's clear now. It's forecasted to go down and the dew point and the temperature are already matched. Like, you know, if it looks like a duck and it quacks like a duck, it's okay to say no. I'm perfectly okay having that conversation with whether it's the news, whether it's a chief pilot, whether it's another coworker in a flying capacity. It's okay to set that limit and stand your ground. And you know what? There's been times when I've called it at the news and it didn't get foggy. And then there's times when I called it and it got really foggy, you know, so just make a decision and live with it. Don't Monday morning quarterback yourself, but also don't think that it can't happen to you. Because I think a lot of the incidents and accidents that happen, not just CFIT, but a lot of things is this, you know, being invulnerable. So, you know, I think that just making sure that you don't have that hazardous attitude, as silly as it sounds, and, you know, going back to the FAA, you know, the antidotes of your hazardous attitudes, you know, you really do have to check yourself and check your different attitudes. So, sad deal. You know, you just hate to see that for the industry. It's had a ripple effect. Insurance rates have skyrocketed. It's not good for helicopters in any metric, you know, when one of the most famous athletes of all time is killed in one. You know, other famous people, Stevie Ray Vaughan, CFIT. You know, there's been local people here in Texas that weren't famous, but, you know, were involved in CFIT, you know, coming back from their wedding. You know, so this is just things that you would hope are avoidable, but they continue to happen. So I really hope that out of the Kobe incident that, you know, as an industry, we can kind of come together and do better. And one of those things, and I will say that we are not connected to this company at all. It's just something that I've been seeing and reading online and in some different magazines, I guess, now getting called out. But it's this new training device. It's called the Icarus device. Have you guys heard of that?
Yeah, absolutely.
What do y'all know about that?
It's funny story. We were, I didn't understand that it was called Icarus and whatnot. And about 3 years ago, I actually had lunch with the gentleman who started this, Nick. He's got a hard last name to pronounce. Sinopoli, I believe, is really bright, talented airman that I had lunch right here in Griffin Springs with him because he was a student of mine for, I think, a flight review or something along those lines back when I was at Veracity Aviation there in Seguin. But ultimately what it is a new type of training device that is more realistic in the transition from VFR to double IMC. It's like a transition. It's a screen that fades into multiple different weather patterns in front of you. What I like about it is it can be attached to a helmet, which obviously for us guys that utilize helmets daily, having that capability for training purposes is cool. There's no need to transition to your safety pilot on landing and whatnot. Like if you set it and the instructor pushes it to clear up into VFR conditions, then that's what happens. Like as if you were coming out of the clouds on a instrument approach. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, what I've seen of it too, it really kind of takes up your whole field of view, which, you know, I always thought foggles were kind of a joke. I actually preferred to do my instrument training at night because I felt like it gave me some better kind of realistic, like, hey, this is probably more what it feels like, just because you couldn't really side out, you know, look down or look to your sides. So I think it's pretty neat. Zach, have you guys seen anything about this Icarus device? Have anything to say about it?
Yeah, I think it's got some pretty cool premise, certainly, and I back as a flight instructor, I don't know if I would have necessarily been as interested in it as I am now. But having gone from the scenario of where you're just like, okay, you're in the clouds, put the foggles down, or whatever, to working for these large companies that have motion, full motion sims and stuff like that, where they can just decrease visibility on you and put you in a scenario where, okay, you can still see the ground, but at this point you're really gonna, you can get to make that decision before you're just in a cloud. It's kind of fun to be able to have that, and so to have something where there's a variable opacity to, I guess would be the word for it, is quite cool. The thing that I think is potentially, and I'd be really curious to try them to see, but like you were saying, it looks like it does hopefully or possibly do a lot better job of limiting more view.
I hope so.
I think that is if it does, that would be pretty tremendous for the value of simulated instrument training. As a little bit of a story on that, I also did as much as possible did instrument stuff at night, but you still get some ground lights, and if you have some peripheral vision, it's still better than truly nothing. But I can remember one time as a flight instructor flying up in Oregon there. I was in the North Practice area, so just on the Washington side of the Columbia. And I had a student on foggles, and I flew them over towards the Columbia River. We're, up, 3,000-4,000 feet or something. And the river and the other side of the river was all fogged in with a layer at 200-300 feet or something like that. But in typical Portland fashion, very fuzzy layer, not much in the way of a crisp floor, ceiling to it there. As soon as I flew him close enough that the chin bubble no longer saw ground, and all he could see was that fuzzy white past his feet out of his peripheral vision, the ability to maintain basic level attitude on his scan completely disappeared. I actually had to help maintain level with the helicopter, and checked in with him, and turned out, because all he had seen was that past his feet, at that angle down there, he thought we had actually popped IMC. So not only did he lose that reference, but also he suddenly had the actual stressors of it, and his capability cut probably down to something like maybe 40%, which just for me was just indicative of building the muscle memory of the scan is great, but it's not the same as something of a more legitimate scenario-based training.
We need something that, if this device went down and then down here, and this lower portion, the opacity was only allowable to see the reference of the instrument panel, I could understand the utilization of this in the training world, especially for new IFR, but it is very, I feel like you can see the ground. We have to figure out a different way other than simulators to do this. And I think the guy's going in the right direction, but maybe have it go closer to the face so that they can't see the ground.
Yeah, and simulators are getting better and better. You have your flight safety shirt on now, so you can certainly attest that, simulators and what you can do in simulators, and going through full checkouts and certifications through a simulator. But it's expensive. So I really commend this guy. Inventing anything is commendable, but seeing a problem and then introducing a new way of trying to address it, it's not going to be perfect. And, this is probably just that first iteration of the Icarus device. But it's exciting to see that people are forward thinking, because you know what? There's a problem in the industry, right? People keep flying into clouds and they run into hills, or they fly into clouds and they get spatially disoriented and they spiral into the ground. There's an issue with the overall industry. And so it's really kudos to this guy. What'd you say his name is, Brian? Nick something?
Nick Sinopoli. He's from Austin, Texas. We need to have him on the podcast.
We got to get him on the podcast. But yeah, kudos to you, man. For thinking outside the box and trying to make the industry a safer place. There's nothing wrong with that. So I will tell you this, guys. I can't believe it. We are over 1 hour. I try to keep these things about an hour. I know that we had some other topics to discuss, but I'll just have to wait till next time. What do you all think? This was pretty fun, huh?
Yeah.
Pretty cool, yeah.
All right,
very,
hold on.
very
I gotta subject our viewers to this, but I'm gonna take a little selfie of all of us. All right, so can you all see? Everyone smile. All right.
Nice.
Everyone can see the selfie. This was fun. Zach, Brian, Mike, I can't thank you guys enough for taking time out of your day to come and talk with me here on the Helicopter Podcast. This is episode number 6. We're getting a great response. I want to thank everyone that's reached out so far. We have people reaching out from Scotland, people reaching out from the East Coast, the West Coast, all over. It's really fun to see this and people reaching out wanting to be on the podcast. So I really appreciate it. This is meant to bring value, and I hope that it is. And I think that we're getting better and better every day, and I love this. So I think we have to do this like once or twice, a month, or maybe at least once every couple months. This was so much fun, and I really appreciate it. Again, this is the Helicopter Podcast, episode number 6. You can check us out on Facebook, the Helicopter Podcast. Thank you to our sponsor, Celicopter. In fact, all of these guys here are connected to Celicopter in one form or the other. We are an industry-based sales team. We help sell used helicopters. Brian is showing his Celicopter hat. I got my Celicopter shirt, so it's pretty cool. I love these guys. These guys are awesome dudes, fantastic pilots, and lucky to have you on the Helicopter Podcast today. So be safe out there, guys. Zach, I want to catch up on your news helicopter job soon, so we'll have to get on a single podcast, I suppose, for that. But I appreciate the time. Again, like, share, subscribe, do whatever you got to do. Take care. Thanks.
As always, a special thanks to Celicopter for producing this podcast. Specializing in helicopter evaluations, faster sales, and superb service, Celicopter is the go-to agency for clients expecting immediate results. Celicopter's team of helicopter professionals are the best in the business. Using their aviation expertise, a nationwide network, and a proprietary 76-step listing strategy, Celicopter will convert your listing from Mayday to payday. Ready to get started? Text Helicopter to 1-855-Celicopter. That's Helicopter to 1-855-735-5226. And a Celicopter pilot agent will reach out. Celicopter. List it, sell it, done.